trip could have gone better. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and a couple of weeks ago, one of you asked for a video talking about the etiquette associated with a TDY trip. And at first I thought, etiquette? Who needs a guide on etiquette when military courtesy should just be enough? Then I started thinking about it, I started getting some feedback from you guys, and I thought, I don't know, maybe this is a bigger issue than I realized at first. So to give you a sense of what we're going to have to cover here, there's a couple of things. And it starts with the rank of your boss. And then that will transition into the purpose of your trip and some implications for your role as you travel with your boss. I'll talk about some fundamentals that just always crop up, and then I'll end with some implications for when people come to visit you on TDY. But before we get into all of that, let me remind you that this whole military business is really all about relationships. No matter what the stated reason of your travel is, the core purpose is always to build and maintain positive relationships. Relationships that might shape international policy on some random Tuesday when at 4 a.m. you've got 72 minutes to make a decision and communicate it to the right people. So let's start by talking about your boss's rank. And to do this, I'm really going to think about two different kinds of trips. The first one is from a post to the Pentagon, and the second one is from the Pentagon to a post. Depending on which direction a TDY trip goes, you can experience a powerful sense of disorientation. For example, if your boss is a colonel and he goes to the Pentagon, especially if he's never been there before, he can be surprised how little weight his rank carries. And that's not a diss on your colonel as an individual. It's just that in the Pentagon, colonels are so common that they don't rate very much special treatment, no matter how important their personal mission is. In this case, you might do a little extra preparation so that when they hit the ground, they don't feel like they're being overlooked. On the flip side, if you've got a colonel from the Pentagon who is heading out to some installation, you might stop them and remind them that where they're going, they're kind of uncommon. You want them to be prepared, that they might see a little extra pomp, and more importantly, that they don't make some sort of faux pas because they don't realize just how many eyes are on them. Similar factors affect a general officer, but to a lesser extent. I mean, a 3-star is a 3-star. Where things get a little more fun is when your boss is a member of the senior executive service or a political appointee who is going to leave the Pentagon and go visit an installation. To a lot of military folks out at military installations, it's kind of assumed that all civilians are subordinate to the military leadership. And the last thing you want is some first lieutenant snubbing the short blonde woman because he doesn't recognize the Secretary of the Army on site. Anyways, if you're going to be traveling with your boss, that trip has a purpose. And if you want to make the most out of that trip, it's important to understand what your boss's purpose for the trip is. It might be just to introduce themselves around because they're the new guy in the position. Maybe they want to get to know the important players at the organization they're visiting. Maybe they need to do a little work to mend relationships. Maybe it's an inspection, either formal or informal. Maybe they have to deliver some kind of report. All of this goes into one of the most etiquette-y parts of a trip, and that is you have to have a plan. I mean, even if you don't have a plan, have a plan. A list of people you are going to meet and when. Who are the most important people for your boss to meet with in order for them to accomplish their purpose? And you want to schedule those most important people as early in the trip as possible. That way, if something comes up and the meeting has to shift, there's still time in your visit to make that possible. I mean, nothing is worse than heading back from a 3-day TDY trip, not having accomplished anything that you set out to do. And understand that the purpose of the trip may influence how you want those meetings to happen. If your boss is traveling so that he can meet key players on somebody else's staff, you might arrange to have one of his peers walk him around and introduce him to people. This is Tammy. Not a single dollar in my organization gets spent without her knowing about it. So if you ever need help, that is Tammy with an I. If your boss is mending fences between organizations, you might want to start with a more private conversation behind closed doors that's followed by a more public situation where your boss and his peers make a show of camaraderie and your boss listens to the concerns of the other organization's staff. If it's a formal inspection, you might want a formal in-brief, a formal out-brief, and your boss quietly out of the way while the inspection actually happens. If it's an informal inspection, it might be handy if your boss just kind of pins down his peer and other senior leaders while some junior folks go running around to sniff out what's really going on. All of these scenarios are going to have implications for your role, and your role is really going to land somewhere on a continuum between constantly at your boss's side all the way down to rarely seen together. If your boss is delivering a report or introducing themselves with a brief, you are going to want to be very close by. You're going to want to make sure that there are no technical glitches, and if some sort of snafu does happen, that your boss isn't left stranded trying to do impromptu stand-up comedy. By the same token, if your role is to be the green eye shade analyst for your boss, you want to make sure that you're in the room when they're getting peppered with questions. If it's a mending fences trip, you're probably not going to be in the room for the one-on-one. But for that public meeting, you are going to want to be in the room, taking notes, with a particular eye towards how can you show progress towards eliminating important friction points. If you're just doing a meet and greet, take note of names, collect some business cards, because you're probably going to be the person who has to deal with these people in future business, and you might as well get started now. For inspections, especially the informal kind, you might leave your boss entirely and just go wandering around. Everybody's looking at the 2-star, and nobody notices the lieutenant colonel strolling through the motor pool. I will say this. If your boss wants you to be traveling with them, they also probably have a good idea of how they want you to support them. So ask the question. Now, there is one consideration that might not seem like etiquette, but it is damn important. If there are any documents that your boss is going to be presenting, assume that something is going to go wrong. Murphy's Law is always in effect, and no matter how many contingencies you put in place, that little devil is going to pop up to try to trip you at the worst time possible. Have a point of contact at the location you're visiting and email them a copy of the documents before you even begin travel. Heck, send it to the other people you're traveling with, just in case. Do I sound paranoid yet? Well, check this out. If you have a classified brief that you are sending and you expect to present, create an unclassified version that you can transport just in case something happens. I have shown up at locations and found out that for God knows what reason, the host has temporarily lost their ability to project classified briefings. Murphy has treated me pretty rough over the years. Okay, now for some fundamentals, and these are some basics that you have to deal with whether you travel with your kids or with your boss or on your own, but they have a special flavor when you're traveling TDY. We're going to talk transportation, lodging, food, and uniform. When it comes to transportation, and particularly with a rental car, consider this. In the HBO show The Sopranos, Tony Soprano never drove himself anywhere. And why? It's because if he got pulled over for a traffic violation, it would be a huge problem. I have had a number of bosses explicitly make me drive because if a problem cropped up, they were just going to ditch me. I had one boss who was like, "Are you lost, Captain Weko? Because I'm not lost. I'm with Captain Weko, who's supposed to get me to my meeting on time." Just as an aside, if you're going to have to play the role of being your boss's pathfinder, do a little preliminary recon if you can to avoid getting lost. Now, I did have one 2-star who insisted on driving, and that was a little weird, but whatever. I mean, traveling with somebody else is a more personal experience than just being together in the office. When it comes to air travel, I prefer to be on the same flight going TDY. That way, you are guaranteed to stay together. If you're going to try to travel before your boss, it's better to travel a lot before your boss so that minor travel delays don't have you showing up late. Something very similar applies to lodging. Does your boss want you close at hand? Because if you're staying at different locations, and there might be reasons for that, there can also be complications. As far as food goes, are you going to be eating together, or are they going to be using meals to have meetings? Are these meals pre-planned, like with reservations that you're responsible for coordinating? Or are meals just an opportunity to regroup? I had a deputy one time where we would go to these quarterly planning conferences, and what he really liked to do was drive far away from the conference and compare notes over dinner. The other thing about TDY, with all its travel and meetings and meals, is the question of uniform. I know, being in the right uniform should not be an issue, but one etiquette consideration is, are you going to be in civilian attire, and what type of civilian attire is expected? I mean, business casual can cover a wide spectrum, and you don't want to be out of place in your sweatshirt and jeans. There is one last thing when it comes to the etiquette of TDY, and this really has to do with hosting someone who is traveling TDY to see you. First of all, if somebody takes the time and effort to come and visit your location, have the courtesy to meet with them. I have seen a lot of people come to the Pentagon expecting the royal treatment only to get snubbed by office after office. And I'm not saying that the people that they wanted to meet with weren't busy, but you don't have to give people the cold shoulder. Hey, look, I only got a few minutes, but I want to introduce you to Ben. Ben is the guy who defends your funding requirements to the big guns, and he's got a couple of important questions he needs to ask you. On the flip side, if people visit you, don't waste their time. I was traveling with a general officer this one time, and a major put on this whole dog and pony show that boiled down to, we need a 6-foot piece of 4x4 lumber. Brother, we got bigger problems in the Army. Well, like I said, there is a lot more to TDY travel than there is to just showing up to the office every day. And if you're going to be part of building the kinds of relationships that your boss and your organization needs in order to succeed, it's going to take some effort. Now, I was not able to get all of the comments that people shared included in this video, so if you've got something I missed, please share it, but I will close with this one thought. Bring snacks. Hungry generals are not what anybody wants to deal with. And now, watch this video.